Okay. Bring some energy. So this is called The Art of Speaking Efficiently. And I usually don't like doing the same lectures every year because I get very bored. I like to do new things, but this is one that I'm willing to do every year because I think that it is relatively fun to do. It's very helpful. And one thing that I like about it is that it's very helpful for debaters regardless of what kind of argument you go for or like to go for, or your experience level, even the style of debate that you do, whether you debate in front of parents at like California local tournaments or whether you debate on the national circuit. It kind of helps everyone, and I like that. So if you have seen this lecture before, this is largely similar to the versions that I've done in the past. There are a few changes. But even if you've seen this before, I think it's kind of useful to review. So as always, I'm going to start with this relatively extended quotation. I'd just like you to kind of take it in. Ours is the age of efficiency. Everywhere people are devising the most efficient methods of performing the operations of their callings. Business people seek the most efficient system of filing and bookkeeping. The manufacturer organizes their labor force and machinery so that every ounce of effort gives the greatest possible return in goods. The railroads are replacing steam with electric power, and surgeons spend many hours planning the best way to remove an appendix in the shortest time. Mechanical inventors speak of a machine as efficient when it does its work without loss of power. If 100 pounds of steam pressure are applied to it, the full 100 pounds are accounted for in valuable engine power. There is no waste. Any instrument is efficient when it gets the most work from a given amount of effort. When we attempt to apply the idea of efficiency to public speaking, we find that it is best expressed by the word effective. The two words, efficient and effective, have, to be sure, very much the same significance. Effective, however, throws the emphasis a little more upon the tangible result, upon the effect produced by any instrument. Now, speech is one of our most useful instruments. It is employed to carry messages from one mind to many others. If it carries the message truly and forcefully, it is effective. But if it loses part of the message or gives it in such weak form that it does not impress the other mind at all, it is ineffective. Speech, then, is an instrument through which one mind works upon others. It ought to be made most effective. And I love this because this comes from a textbook about public speaking called Effective Public Speaking that was published in the year 1919. So we're nearing 100 years, and it was written by a professor of public speaking at the College of the City of New York named Frederick Robinson. And it's the best explanation I've ever heard for the importance of efficiency in communication. And I think that it does a good job of making the connections that I try to make in this lecture between just kind of efficiency in day-to-day life and efficiency in public speaking and its importance. So the reason that I started doing this lecture and the reason that I spent a lot of time thinking about this is that I think inefficiency is kind of a scourge of debate, and especially of modern kind of national circuit style debate. My goal in this lecture is to explain what I mean by efficiency and how the concept of efficiency can be translated to debate, to provide kind of a very comprehensive overview of the most common inefficiencies and kinds of inefficiencies, and then to give you some practical tips and suggestions about how to improve your efficiency via different drills and practice. So there are three parts to this. The first part is the value of efficiency. The second part is the most common inefficiencies. So that's where I'll describe the most typical ways that you all are inefficient. And then the third section is an explanation of drills to improve efficiency. So if you're flowing along, those are the three major Roman numerals. So Roman numeral number one is the value of efficiency. Why am I talking about this? Why is this a lecture? Subpoint A is kind of a definition of efficiency. So if you look up the word efficiency in a dictionary, let's say you picked Random House Dictionary, you would see the following definition. Efficiency, the state or quality of being efficient, competency in performance. That's the first definition. The second definition is accomplishment of or ability to accomplish a job with a minimum expenditure of time and effort. And the third definition is the ratio of the work done or energy developed by a machine, engine, etc. to the energy supplied to it, usually expressed as a percentage. So that's the thing that Robinson described in the opening quotation. So then, efficiency, it means the art of being efficient or the action of being efficient. What does efficient mean? So if you look that up in the same Random House Dictionary, you'll find the definition of efficient. Performing or functioning in the best possible manner with the least waste of time and effort is the first definition. That's the best definition. Also, you might find satisfactory and economical to use. It's pretty good. or utilizing a particular commodity or product with the least waste of resources or effort. All of those, I think, are good. In debate, when we say efficiency or efficient, what we mean is the ability to effectively communicate the maximum amount of content within the time constraints of a speech. So how much can you say? How much meaningful stuff can you say in the amount of time that you're allocated to speak? So whether that's the 3 minutes of your cross-examination or the 8 minutes of your constructive or the 5 minutes of your rebuttal. How much meaningful content can you pack into those speeches? And as Robinson explained in that introductory quote, that kind of cool thing from 1919, the goal is to eliminate waste. Every utterance that you make, every word that you say, every moment of your speech should be purposefully directed toward winning the debate, toward persuading the judge to vote for you. It should be useful and it should contribute to victory. Any moment of your speech, any word, any utterance that does not contribute to your winning the debate is an inefficient word or phrase or whatever. And your goal should be to eliminate that inefficiency. The reason that inefficiency is such a problem in debate is twofold. Number one, and I think the most important reason, is it's just a series of bad habits. And those bad habits get quickly modeled by other students and passed down among the generation. So some of the inefficiencies that you all have, you didn't invent them. You saw others doing them, and you started doing them, purposefully or unconsciously because you saw debaters that you looked up to or that thought were good debaters doing those things, and then you started doing them. But the problem is that over time, we've just accumulated this kind of unending series of inefficiencies, and it's very hard to get rid of them because they're just bad habits. That's the first reason. The second reason is maybe a more practical one, and it's that sometimes you're going too fast. And you're going too fast in the particular sense that your brain can't catch up with what you're trying to say. You need a moment to think during the course of your speech. You can't think as fast as you're trying to talk. And so as a result, you kind of insert filler language to give yourself that moment to think. But the problem with that is that over the course of a speech, all of those moments that you're kind of giving yourself to think add up to a lot of speech time. And so you're really wasting a large chunk of the time that you're allocated in one of your speeches. Raymond, can you rock the door? I don't know what's going on out there, but something weird. Thank you very much. All right, so subpoint B. Good speaking is good writing. This one, some people get this right away. Some people don't really ever get this, but hopefully this helps. Debate is a speaking activity, obviously. So it's an oral communication activity. You communicate through your speech, your public speech. But it's also a writing activity. And in the same way that for your English class, an efficiently worded essay will get a better grade, and even is just demanded by your English teachers, efficiently worded speeches make sense to submit to the judge that's evaluating your public speech. So it makes sense the kind of beginning parts of the debate are writing, right? Your constructive speeches are largely written. So you've got your 1AC, that's kind of a written speech. You've got your 1NC, that's a series of written materials that you combine into a speech on the fly. But I want to suggest that the rebuttals are when the real writing occurs. And if you think about your rebuttals as written speeches that are delivered orally, I think it helps with dealing with some of the inefficiencies that crop up and some of the structural inefficiencies that I find in speeches. So in order to give a good rebuttal, you have to be clear, you have to be persuasive, but you have to do so without a written script. But what you are doing as you're speaking is not just speaking, but writing a speech extemporaneously during your rebuttal time. And that's a really challenging thing to do, but it's one of the reasons that debate is such a powerful activity and prepares us so well for a variety of fields and life situations, because often we're forced to kind of speak precisely and clearly and to communicate our ideas in a situation where we don't have a written script to rely on. So good speaking, just like good writing, the kind of things you learn about in your English class, must be clear, it must be concise, and it must be well organized. You need to let the content shine through. You don't want to distract from the content of your ideas. The purpose of writing and the purpose of speaking is to get across your ideas. It's the ideas that matter. And to the extent that your writing or speaking distracts from or creates confusion with your content, you've kind of messed up the process. George Orwell has written a famous essay that I really like called Politics and the English Language, and I would encourage all of you to read it. It's relatively short. And in it, he proposed the following rules for good writing, and you're going to hear a lot of this stuff repeated as I discuss the debate application of this. Rule number 1 is never use a metaphor, simile, or other figure of speech which you are used to seeing in print. So no cliches. Don't use needless metaphors or things like that. Number 2, never use a long word where a short one will do. Needless complication, bad. Say your argument in the simplest way possible. Number 3, if it is possible to cut a word out, always cut it. So if we can say what we want to say in fewer words, do so. Number 4, never use the passive where you can use the active. So no passive voice when active voice is possible. There are limited situations where the passive voice makes sense, but whenever possible, eliminate it. Never use a foreign phrase, a scientific word, or a jargon word if you can think of an everyday English equivalent. That's number 5. So if you can say something using everyday language, do so. If you can eliminate a foreign phrase or an overly scientific word, a jargon word, get rid of it. And finally, Orwell says, number 6, break any of these rules sooner than say anything outright barbarous. And that was just sort of him being funny. So all of these rules apply to our debate speeches in the same way that they apply to writing and written word. Orwell was mostly critiquing academic writing and kind of the silliness that often is found in academic writing. But the same thing, I think, if he was around to watch modern day debates, he would have the same reaction. Why are we saying things in such a complicated way? Why are we constructing our sentences in the way that we are? Why are we doing what we do? Why don't we just kind of say what we mean and say it as simply as possible? So if you think about the speeches that you give as written texts and as giving speeches as the process of writing speeches, just kind of extemporaneously, I think it helps a lot with language choices and it helps a lot with eliminating the stuff that I'm going to talk about. Subpoint C, the last subpoint under this header. Efficiency is a means to an end, not an end in itself. Efficiency is a means to an end, not an end in itself. This is important. So what efficiency does, the reason we value it, is that it facilitates effective communication. The goal is to maximize the utility or usefulness of every moment of the speech. Efficiency creates more room for content, and it allows you to get deeper into the arguments. It allows your content to be more fully developed. By itself, efficiency doesn't improve the content of your argument. So just because you've said something more efficiently doesn't mean you've said something better, or that your idea is better. So if you have a bad argument or an undeveloped argument, just because you've delivered that argument more efficiently doesn't make it a better argument. But efficiency does allow you to just have more functional time in your speeches. And if that creates more depth, it's valuable. If that results in just more shallowness, then it wasn't really particularly valuable. One thing that I like to mention is that there are 2 ways that I think debaters are unclear. So a lot of times students get the feedback, you weren't very clear. I had trouble flowing here. I had trouble understanding you. I would encourage you to unpack that, because there are 2 meanings for that. The first meaning is the obvious one that I think you all pick up on right away. It's that the judge couldn't understand the words that you were speaking. Your utterances were incomprehensible, or partially incomprehensible. They were difficult to understand. So the judge didn't understand what you were saying, like the words that you were saying. But I think a lot of times that's not the problem, or it's not the whole problem. The second way that unclear can kind of, what that can mean in debates, is that the judge doesn't understand what you mean by the words that you are saying. So the judge understands your words. They hear what you're saying, but they don't get what you're saying. They don't understand what you're saying. And the purpose of efficiency and improving your efficiency is to simultaneously give yourself more time, but also to just make your arguments clearer, make your arguments easier to understand, easier to digest. And if you're someone who gets the comment, you're not very clear, I have trouble following you, it's important to figure out, does that mean that my utterances are tough to comprehend, like the words that I'm saying the judge isn't getting, or the ideas that I'm trying to communicate aren't being understood or aren't being clearly communicated? Oftentimes it's a mix, but improving your efficiency can make dramatic improvements in your clarity. A couple of caveats. So efficiency is not an excuse to eliminate efficient communication. So some people get kind of obsessed with being really efficient, and they interpret that to mean kind of always going top speed, always making as many arguments as possible, never slowing down, never making any connections, because all of that is wasted time. But in fact, the goal of being a more efficient debate speaker is so that you have more time for those connections, and for those moments where you slow down, and for those moments where you go deeper and really explain something. Efficient debaters just have more time to make the kinds of connections that win close debates or that beat top-flight opponents. So the goal of this is not just go as fast as possible at all moments of a speech, say as many words as possible during the course of a speech. If that's kind of what you get out of this, then I haven't done my job. So Roman numeral 2, the most common inefficiencies. I have separated this into 3 categories. The first major category is speech structure. So these are inefficiencies in the way that you structure your speeches. The second is sentence structure. So the way that you structure your sentences within your speech. And the final section is word economy. So words that you say needlessly, or words that can be eliminated. So subpoint A, speech structure. The way that you structure your speeches has a dramatic impact on your efficiency. The goals that you should have in this area are to eliminate unnecessary transitions and to use clear and concise labels. So as you're conceptualizing the structure of your speech, just kind of the way that you go about giving your speech, the line by line, the technique of your speech, eliminate the unnecessary transitions and use clear and concise labels so that you are able to be followed. So what are the common ones here? Number 1, long introductions. So for example, I have 3 answers. My first argument will be that the counterplan solves this warrant. Or, first of all, we meet their interpretation. I love substructure and numbering. I love numbering, really, not necessarily substructure. I think it improves flowability. I think it helps with efficiency. I think it allows you to have the judge clearly follow how many arguments you're making. So if you're a 1N and you're delivering your case front lines, number them. If you're the 2A and you're delivering your off-case responses, number them. I love that. But what some students tend to do is they add these long introductions to their arguments. So I have 3 answers. My first answer will be, just say 1, and then whatever your first answer to the counterplan is. First of all, we meet their interpretation. You're just 1, we meet. Blah, 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 blah. Those long introductions don't help. They just take up a bunch of speech time. And sometimes they're delivered in ways that are even hard to follow. I have 3 answers. My first argument will be that, and then maybe you don't say 2, or maybe you don't say 3. And then the judge is very confused because you said that you were going to say 3 arguments, but maybe you didn't know, or maybe you had to edit on the fly. So eliminate those long introductions. Number 2, go to the whatever debate, or drop down to the whatever debate, or drop down to whatever. So for example, drop down to the solvency debate. Now go to the permutation debate. Stuff like that. I like signposting. Can be helpful, can be good. Most of the time, I want students to signpost, tell me what you're answering. But visual directions and this kind of like turn-by-turn stuff doesn't make any sense. You're not Siri. You're not like attempting to help the judge drive. Like turn left at the next intersection in 400 feet, bear right, or whatever. You don't need to do that because what you are saying is the turn-by-turn direction. So the directions on top of directions don't make very much sense. So all of this stuff is very inefficient. Don't say drop down to the whatever debate. If you start talking about the permutation or you reference the permutation, then the judge knows that you're talking about the permutation. It is redundant and inefficient to suggest what you are about to do and then do it. Just do it and the judge will know what you're doing. Number 3, a related one. Extend across. Extend across. So, extend across to 2AC number 1. We meet. Or, they have conceded our impact. Extend across that economic decline causes war. This is very pervasive. Everyone uses this. the idea of extending an argument makes sense. And like, it helps us think about what you do in a debate. Well, you make arguments, and then sometimes you extend those arguments into future speeches, and then you keep developing them. But you don't need to say that that's what you're doing, because it is implied in what you are doing. So if you say, whatever the argument in number 1 is, if you say we meet and develop that argument, the judge knows that you are extending across, whatever that means, the number 1 argument that we meet. You don't have to say that that's what you're doing. And more importantly, when you kind of think about it as if saying that is what you're doing, then a lot of times you just say that and don't make an argument. Extend across 2AC number 1, we meet, because we meet. Now, extend across number 2, counter-interpretation. It's this. It exists. Now extend across number 3, and you're not making any arguments. You're just like saying what the 2AC said. Or the same thing if you're negative and you're extending across 1 and C arguments, or extending across arguments on the line ballot. The same thing is true of like cross-apply. 2AC number 1, cross-apply that we meet. Like, that doesn't mean anything. Do your debating, and the judge will understand just like performatively what you are doing is extending or applying or whatever. You don't have to say that you're doing that. Number 4, but that's not true. But that's not true. So this one has gotten really, really common for whatever reason. I'm sure someone who's good does this. So you all have modeled that individual dastardly. They say that ocean biodiversity is resilient, but that's not true. Ocean biodiversity is not resilient. They say China has sweet ocean mapping technology, but that's not true. China does not have sweet ocean mapping technology. By answering an argument, you are implying that the argument is not true in your opinion. Okay? But saying that your opinion of their argument is that it's not true is unhelpful. Okay? Unless you have a reason, that's not an argument. And if you do have a reason, then you're already proving that their argument is not true, and there's no need to say that. This is an example of these kind of long-winded, weird methods of signposting, or weird methods of referencing. If you say China doesn't have sweet ocean mapping technology, you are just performing your response to China does have sweet ocean mapping technology. But if all you say is, but that's not true, opposite statement, you haven't made an argument. And that's one of the problems with a lot of these inefficiencies, is that they come to replace arguments instead of aiding in the communication of them. Number 5, another very common one. Doesn't assume that. You all love this one. They say that stocks are key to the economy, but this doesn't assume our evidence that stocks are not key to the economy. Dumb, not helpful. They say that Obama isn't spending a lot of money on ocean exploration, but this doesn't assume our evidence that Obama is spending a lot of money on ocean exploration. Boom! Take that, other team. It doesn't assume what we said that says the opposite. Almost all of the time, this is totally meaningless. This is just another way of you saying, but we said the opposite. FYI, Judge. They said that stocks are key to the economy. We said they weren't, all right? Let's just be clear about that, Judge. Okay? We said the opposite, so vote for us. Okay? That doesn't make any sense. Sometimes saying, they don't assume, you have the right idea. There's like something helpful in your intuition. So for example, you might say that, they say Obama's ocean exploration spending is low. That doesn't assume our evidence that describes how his ocean exploration spending is high. If there's a kernel of truth to that, just say the argument and get rid of that stupid jargon. They say Obama's ocean exploration spending is low, but a major initiative was announced 3 months after their evidence was written. Even if spending was low, the new initiative has substantially increased it. That's an argument. Okay? But the phrase doesn't assume that is not an argument, and often it's an excuse not to make an argument. Get rid of that. So those last two, but that's not true and doesn't assume that, are specific versions of number 6, which is verbose signposting. For example, 2AC number 1, they say that our disadvantage is not unique because there is a lot of spending already in the status quo, but there is not already a lot of spending right now in the status quo. Extend across our uniqueness evidence, which talks about how there isn't a lot of spending right now in the status quo. Boom, killed the number 1, right? Done. Just don't even need to say more. Obviously, it's good to signpost, okay? You want to reference what argument you're answering. The purpose of that is so that the judge understands what argument you're answering, and so that you can kind of keep things organized and keep the judge on the same page. But it's got to be efficient. Too often, students provide just some kind of huge re-explanations of what the other team said. You're basically giving a speech for them. And you're hiding the fact that you're not really saying anything in a bunch of convoluted references. In this situation, all I did is I just said the opposite. I said, no, they are wrong. But I didn't say why, and I didn't make an argument, but I invested, God, that's a lot of words. That's like 35 words or something to say nothing. Just to reference their argument and kind of imply that I answered it, I guess, without actually answering it. That's terrible. Instead of doing that, use very brief signposts. So 2AC1, or they say not unique, or whatever. Or give a try to embedded clash. Current spending is low, and then make your arguments. I would be careful with that, because I think it raises the bar on how precise you have to be, and it can really make kind of your clarity and your structure tougher for the judge to follow. And so unless you're really good at it, kind of minor mistakes become major mistakes in judge comprehension. But I would play around with it, and I would give it a shot. And different speech contexts and different arguments require different methods of signposting, but I would never suggest the kind of verbose signposting that I described in that example. It's never useful. Number 7, convoluted labels. You all love this one. All right. See if you can follow this delightful treat. Our evidence is from a professor in the field, whereas their evidence is from a journalist without academic credentials and so doesn't understand the specialized issues involved with ocean policy. Snap. Evidence comparison. Love it, right? That is nearly impossible to understand, and it is totally needlessly overwordy. Instead of that, try this. You can even go a little slower. Prefer academic credentials to journalism. Important for analyzing ocean policy. Wow, that's so clear. I understand what they said. Judges need to be able to follow and flow your arguments. So they need to be able to understand your arguments, and they need to be able to write something down that acknowledges that they understood your argument so they can be reminded of that argument later. Front-loading your arguments with what you want the judge to write down and what you want the judge to remember or what you want the judge to understand, unsurprisingly, helps the judge write that thing down or understand that thing or remember that thing instead of some other random detail that they got during your convoluted rant. So following that first thing, I don't know what I would write down. I might write down professor, or I might write down like specialized or something, but I have no idea. The second one, I'm going to write down academic credentials, act cred or something like that. And I will remember as a judge, oh, they said academic credentials is important. So I'll remember that. Front-loading, flowable labels, all really important. Number 8, the last one in this section, the illusion of depth. Illusion of depth. Many of the examples that I've already given are embodiments of the illusion of depth. Some students, a lot of students, kind of think that or perceive that time spent talking about an argument is productive and kind of determines how developed that argument is. So it's like, well, how much did you say about the 2AC number 1? Well, I spent 30 seconds on it. So I thought it was 30 seconds worth of important. Okay? That's not really depth, right? That's just time. And if that time is spent just like saying inefficient things or just signposting and labeling and just disagreeing with strange sentence constructions, they say 2AC number 1, but that doesn't assume that we said 2AC number 1 is not true, which their evidence doesn't assume, because we have said that it's not true, and their evidence doesn't speak to that, which means that 2AC number 1 is not true according to our evidence, which says 2AC number 1 is not true, or whatever. Like, you all just find these weird ways to say nothing and take up a long period of time. These inefficiencies can be a shield or like a cloak that hides how shallow your arguments really are, how little you are actually saying, how little content or substance there is to what you are saying. You all are like excellent politicians. You like said all these words, but it didn't mean anything. You didn't really say anything controversial or tough or detailed or informative or intelligent. You just kind of talked for a long time. And a lot of your speeches I would describe as having the illusion of depth. You kind of listen to them, it's just like sound and fury signifying nothing. It's like, boy, they were like foaming at the mouth and going 350 words per minute and huffing and puffing and gasping for air. At the end of the speech, I look at my phone and I'm like, they said non-military wasn't topical. Okay. They said that because of limits. Okay. Limits, I got it. You could have said that in a minute, but you said it in 5 minutes and you just huffed and puffed and all that. Illusion of depth. Get rid of that. All right. Subpoint B, next major section, sentence structure. The way that you structure your sentences, in addition to your speeches, very important. And I think this is the most common and most important set of inefficiencies. It's the most important barrier to effectively communicating your speeches to your judge. The goals in this area are to use active voice, not passive voice, and to keep your sentences as simple as possible. Both of which, in your English classes, in that setting, are just truisms that you wouldn't even think to circumvent or disagree with. But in debate, for whatever reason, you're like, debate is different than school, it's different than writing. My writing teacher tells me this is how to effectively write something, but in debate, screw that, I'm going rogue. I'm gonna do me. Don't do you. Do good English. Number one, for a reason, which means that. If I could eliminate one 3-word phrase from debate, only one, I would like to eliminate many, it would be which means that. This drives me crazy, and I have no idea where this came from. But you all have just learned it from one another forever, and all of you are just victims of past injustices to the English language here. So for example, the United States has a strong military and the world's largest economy, which means that hegemony is resilient and sustainable. Or, predictability is the biggest internal link to limits, which means that our interpretation solves limits better. Why are you saying that? It's so confusing and stupid. It's just dumb. I don't get it. Which means that you connect two statements. So you use which means that to connect statement 1 and statement 2. But instead of just saying it clearly, like statement 1 is true because of statement 2, you say because of the existence of statement 1, therefore statement 2 is true. But you do it in a way that is so difficult to follow. So let's break each of these down. The United States has a strong military and the world's largest economy, which means that hegemony is resilient and sustainable. Okay. Well, what are you trying to say? You're trying to say this. Hegemony is resilient and sustainable because the US has a strong military and the world's largest economy. Wow, that's simple. That's easy to follow. That takes less words, okay? Or, predictability is the biggest internal link to limits, which means that our interpretation solves limits better. Well, what are you trying to say? You're trying to say our interpretation sets better limits because it's most predictable. That's simple. But in both of those, then it leaves the question like, why? What is your support for that argument? Why is a strong military and the world's largest economy, why does that mean that hegemony is resilient and sustainable? Then have a sentence to explain why. Or why is predictability so important for limits? Explain why. But by constructing your sentences using these weird passive voice constructions, X, which means that Y, you've used that illusion of depth trick. You're like trying to trick everyone into thinking that you said something, when in reality you just connected two things and asserted the connection between those two things proves the second part of the construction, right? Which is dumb. That's not logically sound, and it's not persuasive, and it's really hard to follow. Because if I was flowing that, I might write down, military or econ. But you didn't really want me to write down military econ. You want me to write down hedge is resilient and sustainable, because that's the claim that you're trying to prove. Get rid of which means that, and it will help you get rid of a lot of your other problems with passive voice nonsense and monstrosities. Number 2, and a close number 2. So if you gave me 2 things that I could eliminate from debate, this would be number 2. Reason as to why. Reason as to why. This one is so frustrating because no one says this ever except in debate. So for example, they went for the K, and you're getting up for your 2AR, and you're like kind of rocking it with your timer in your hand, and you're like adjusting things, you're getting ready for your big speech, and you want to kill it on the opening statement. There's no reason as to why the alternative solves the case. There's no reason as to why the alternative. What are you saying? Why did you say that? That doesn't make any sense. You're going for T. Our interpretation captures all the reasons as to why their interpretation solves limits. What does that mean? Why are you saying it like that? As to why serves absolutely no purpose. That does not add anything to the sentence other than confusion and extra words. Instead of there's no reason as to why the alternative solves the case, just say either there's no reason the alternative solves the case, but I don't even like that. How about just the alternative doesn't solve the case? And then explain why. Why do we have to make it passive voice? Why do we have to make it so weird? Why do we have to sound like we don't speak English? Instead of saying, our interpretation captures all the reasons as to why their interpretation solves limits, how about our interpretation solves limits? Explain. Again, this is a technique that allows you to get away with, you don't really get away with it, you lose, but it allows you to have the impression that you have said more than you have said. all you've really said here is a very basic statement. All doesn't solve case, or our interp solves limits. But you haven't explained why, and you haven't justified either of those statements, but because of your sentence construction, you've given the impression that you did, or maybe you think to yourself that you did. Get rid of that, speak clearly, speak in active voice, say what you mean, and then justify what you say. Don't dance around it with these weird debate things. Number 3, the fact that. This is so stupid, it's totally useless. Total filler language. The fact that our interpretation gives them ground means you should err app on reasonability. The fact that economic collapse causes war means our impact outweighs. The fact that, why do you say that? No one speaks like that in day-to-day language. Like, the fact that people are sick in the dorm means that I'm going to wash my hands a lot. The fact that the line at Epicurean is really long means that I'm going to go to M Street for lunch today. No. You say, I'm going to go to M Street for lunch today, the lines at Epicurean are real long. Or I'm going to wash my hands a bunch because everybody in the dorm is sick. That's how you talk, right? Just because you've entered debate, it's not like, oh, I can't talk like that anymore. It can't be simple. Can't like say what I mean. Got to say weird stuff. Got to trick it up. Got to confuse people. Got to sound like I'm using big words or whatever. No, just say what you mean. So instead of the fact that our interpretation gives them ground means you should err app on reasonability, say our interpretation gives them ground, err app on reasonability, or it sort of depends on what you mean and it's hard to even know what you mean. Err app on reasonability because our interpretation gives them ground. But either way, you then started an actual argument which you can support with an additional sentence or two, or even a paragraph if it was a final rebuttal. But the way you've constructed the initial thing with the fact that, you've confused that. You've made it very difficult to explain your argument or to understand your argument. It's garbage. Number 4, default to or defer to. Default to. No one uses those words, except in debate. The fact that our interpretation solves back their offense probably means you should default to it. The fact that they have no offense means you should defer to our DA or default to our DA. What does that mean? That means nothing. I would be willing to bet that none of you ever uses the phrase default to in everyday conversation. Like, I don't drink coffee, so I default to orange juice in the morning. I don't like Indian food, so I defer to Mexican food for dinner. Anybody ever say that? No, of course not. But in debate, you say that all the time, and it doesn't make sense, and it doesn't really make an argument. So if you're saying the fact that our interpretation solves their offense means you should default to it, that is not an argument. All you're saying is your interpretation solves their offense. Okay? And maybe you're saying if our interpretation solves their offense, then prefer it because of our offense or something like that. But there's an argument that needs to be made there. And defaulting to something or deferring to something is not an argument. That's just like a suggestion. Like, so judge, default to us, please. Right? Just do it. Like, you got to have a default, right? I don't know what that even means. Like, you should just auto vote for us? Or like, if it's close, vote for us? Or like, if you get confused, pick us? Like, because we suggested that you... I don't even know what it means. It doesn't mean anything. But some of you think it's real important. It's like, yeah, default to the case. It's a big impact, so default to it. Just like, if you got no idea what's going on, just pick that one, because we've suggested it loudly and aggressively. No, don't. Number 5, actually going to be able to, or actually. This gets personal. Some of you are like, oh God, I say this all of this stuff. I said, this is all I say. How am I going to give a debate speech? He's taking away all of the things that I say. I might have to make arguments. I'm going to go to original oratory. So, how about this one? Oh, the timer's always important. They're not actually going to be able to solve for the economy because nuclear war collapses trade. The dissad actually turns the case because economic decline makes war more likely. Actually, what do you actually? Actually going to be able to transform simple statements that are not complicated and they're often just not even really arguments into these weird, very lengthy passive voice obfuscations that confuse things. So instead of saying, they're not actually going to be able to solve for the economy because nuclear war collapses trade, how about nuclear war undermines the economy because it collapses trade? Which is an argument. And then maybe have a sentence to explain that argument. Instead of the dissent actually turns the case because economic decline makes more war likely, how about economic decline turns the case because it makes war more likely? Ooh, argument. Exciting. Actually going to be able to. Actually going to be able to. 6 words. If you say that a lot, that quickly adds up to a lot of speech time. And if you add in which means that, the fact that, that's 12 words that you just use repeatedly. 12 words here, 12 words there. It doesn't seem like a lot, but over the course of an 8-minute speech, God, that's like a minute of speech time that you are wasting creating passive voice things that are hard to understand and eliminating, content. It's terrible. You shouldn't do it. You should try really hard as you can to eliminate this stuff. Number 6, our evidence indicates that, or our evidence specifically indicates that, or our evidence talks about, or our evidence specifically talks about. And sometimes you pick different adjectives. Particularly, especially, confidently. Actually, I made that. So for example, our royal evidence indicates that economic decline increases the risk of war. Or our Zappone evidence specifically indicates that finding the plane is the ultimate soft power prize. Or our Brooks et al. Evidence talks about how hegemony prevents war. Confusing. Instead of saying your author name or your citation, and then kind of slowly working up to what they've said, using a weird transition phrase, just make your argument and then cite your supporting evidence. So, economic decline increases the risk of war. Maybe explain why the evidence says that, and say that's royal. Think of your citations, your evidence citations and speeches as verbal footnotes. So you make the argument, you want the judge to write down the argument, and then you tell the judge what piece of evidence supports that argument. But you don't begin by saying, our royal evidence specifically indicates that in the status quo right now, economic decline causes war. No. Economic decline causes war, explain your argument, that's royal. If you get rid of if you do this a lot, like if this is how you refer to evidence, getting rid of this can give you a lot of time. It can give you time to read another card or 2 more cards. It can give you, enough time to actually explain what your evidence says instead of just, referencing it very obtusely or with a lot of words. It also makes it easier to follow you. Because you don't really want the judge just to write down royal, you want the judge to write down what the argument is. You don't want the judge to just write down Zappone and then later be like, they said something about Zappone, I wonder what they were talking about. You want the judge to write down ultimate soft power prize or economic decline equals war or whatever. And it's important to verbalize the author, certainly. You need the footnote, you got to say where you got this argument. So if the judge wants to review the evidence, they can do so. But it's about the argument, and then the evidence supports that argument. It's not just a list of citations. So get rid of those ones. All right, subpoint C, word economy. So we got problems with our speech structure for sure. We got problems with our sentence structures for sure. We have wordy, we have the wordy signposting and the weird long introductions. We got all this passive voice garbage. We got all these just strange things that we say in the middle of our sentences. But we also just have a lot of words that are just filler language or they're just meaningless jargon. And they unnecessarily complicate our word choices. So our goals in this area are to minimize jargon, to eliminate filler language, and to simplify our phrases. Again, this all kind of comes back to just say what you mean. Number 1, in the round, or in the debate, or in this debate, or in this debate round. Again, just picture, it's a tough debate, it's a big deal. Standing up for my 2AR, I got my timer, I'm doing the thing where I do this weirdly. Hang on, let me get a drink of water. Look. Big moment. Heart's pounding, getting ready to get my speech. All right, ready. Hang on. Try this. We access the biggest impact in the round. Nuclear war causes extinction. All right. They have no offense in the debate. Any risk of our impact outweighs. Just in case you were wondering, we're in a debate. And this is a debate round. And we're in it, right? That's where we're at. We're in the round. We know that, okay? Trust me, every debate judge knows they're in a debate round. Because either they like it, like, oh, I'm in a debate, I'm a debate judge, I'm judging a debate. Or they hate it, I hate debate, but I'm judging debate, don't want to do that. They know that this is a debate round. They're not confused. They don't think that this is, a dramatic interpretation round. They don't think that this is, a poetry reading or whatever. They don't think that this is a job interview. We have the biggest impact in this job interview. Oh, that would confuse me. We're in a job. I don't want to hire any of you. You can't speak efficiently. Don't say that, and don't say any of the related crap that's just about like referencing where you are, like on the flow, on this dissad, or whatever. If you're talking about this flow, we know you're talking about that flow. If you're talking about this dissad, we know you're talking about that dissad. If you're talking about this debate, we know you're talking about this debate. There is no need to point that out, okay? But some of you do it just repeatedly out of habit, and it's weird. We have the best interpretation in this debate because we provide the best limits for this debate, and there is no in-round abuse in this round because our interpretation provides them plenty of ground in this debate. They have a lot of ground in this debate to make arguments, and you should vote for our interpretation within this debate because it is the best interpretation in this debate round based on your flow of this debate round. What do you think we want? You didn't? No, that's meaningless nonsense. Get rid of that. Don't say that. Number 2, another really popular one. Right now. Or in the status quo. I always picture students saying this in like the movie trailer voice. In the status quo. Bad things are happening. Right now. Nuclear war is imminent. So like, for example, poverty is not being solved right now. China is not pursuing cyber weapons in the status quo. We already know that. It just makes explicit something that is implicitly understood. If you're saying poverty is not being solved, that implies that poverty is not being solved right now or in the status quo, which just means right now or as things are. It's like a weird way to kind of think like you're adding, like, I'm adding some Latin to my speech. I'm using Latin words. That'll really spice things up. I'm not just going to say China's not pursuing cyber weapons. I'm going to say they're not doing it in the status quo. The judge is going to be really impressed by my Latin. No, the judge is not impressed. The judge already understands. If you say China's not developing cyber weapons, that means they're not developing cyber weapons right now. There are certainly moments where you want to reference, the status quo or the word status quo, but some of you just do it repeatedly without thinking about it. It's just part of your descriptions. Hegemony is down in the status quo. Soft power is high. Right now, in the status quo. Our dissad turns the case. Right now, in the status quo. Like, no, oops. You just said it for no reason. Get rid of that one. Number 3. This one bothers me too. I forgot about this one. Solve back, or check back, or link back, or turn back, or anything followed by back. I don't know where this one came from. This one's a really old one. This has been in debate for as long as I've been in debate. We solve back for their economy impact. Our interpretation checks back their limits, offense, back. What does that even mean? Right? What does it mean to solve back for something? What does it mean to check back something? As opposed to like solves front something, solves side something, solves up something, solves down something, solves arm something. I don't even know what back means in that instance. Is it like a body part? It solves the back of the thing? Is it directional? Like, our dissad solves front the case. Like, you wouldn't say that, but that's no less dumb than solve back, right? If your argument is that your impact solves their impact, just say that. Or your impact accesses their impact. Just say what you mean. But certainly eliminate the word back. And a lot of times just eliminate the whole thing. Because solves, whatever, that doesn't really make sense. Or checks something. Like maybe you want to say, mutually assured destruction prevents escalation or prevents miscalculation, something like that. Just say that. Don't say, this calculation is check backed by mutually assured destruction. That's confusing. You don't know what you mean. Just say what you mean. Don't ever say the word back. Just makes you sound silly. Number 4, things like or things such as. This one's relatively recent. I've added this one since I started doing this lecture a few years ago. So, the DA turns the case. It accesses things like war and the economy. Or, capitalism makes things such as environmental destruction and global warming inevitable. Things such as. Just take those words out. The worst version of this is when you say things like or things such as, and then you just say one thing. Those are just silly. Economic decline causes things such as war. And maybe other things that are like war. But I'm not going to let you know what they are. I'll let that be a mystery. I'm mysterious. Capitalism causes things like no value to life. And potentially other things. I'm not going to mention them. You can maybe figure it out. I might get around to it later. But they'll be like, or such as, no value to life. Just say your argument. Capitalism kills value to life. Now, the DA turns the case. It accesses war. It accesses the economy. Just make your argument. Things like, things such as, total useless filler. That's just one of those things we've developed. Someone developed this because they couldn't think as fast as they were talking. So they added a couple of words in there, give themselves time to think. And they were trying to think of the list of things that capitalism solves. So instead of saying like capitalism destroys the environment and causes inevitable economic collapse, they were like capitalism causes things such as environmental destruction and also things like inevitable economic decline. No, that was not good. That's not something to model. That's something to eliminate. That was a shortcoming, not something that was cool that they said. Number 5. A lot of these one-word ones. The next 2 are both about single words. Probably. And I would add to probably, and the words are used in the same way, obviously, clearly, uniquely, and particularly. Probably is the most common, but a lot of you have just been like, it's kind of old news to say probably like 500 times in your speech. So I'm going to mix it up and I'm going to say obviously where other people say probably. Innovation. I got swag. I say obviously. They all say probably obviously. I'm going to mix it up. I'm going to say particularly 34 times in this next speech. So for example, the disad probably turns the case because economic decline causes war. Or, our link turn probably outweighs the link because it is more specific to the plan. Probably. This is probably a bad idea. Well, probably joke. Probably means almost certainly, as far as one knows or can tell. Okay, that's the definition of the word probably. If that is what you mean, then you can omit that word because that's already what you're saying. If you say the disad turns the case, you think that's almost certain, or as far as you can know or tell, or as the judge should know or tell, then you have already said, implicitly, probably. You haven't stated like certainly or whatever. It is just meaningless filler. Same thing is true with obviously. Obviously just means self-evident. It's not self-evident. And saying that it is self-evident doesn't make it self-evident. You still have to prove to the judge that your argument is self-evident or whatever. And if after listening to your argument, the judge thinks that your argument is self-evident, they will think that it was obvious. But suggesting to them that it was obvious doesn't achieve that end. Clearly, easy to understand. Again, kind of obvious. If you think that your argument clearly gets to a certain impact or clearly proves a certain point, just make your argument. And if you are successful in your argument, the judge will agree. Yeah, that was clear. It's clear to me that the disad outweighs the case. Or it's clear to me that their interpretation is better. But saying it doesn't make the judge any clearer about it. Uniquely, that just means like, I don't even know what it means. It means like, in the way that you all speak it, only this. So, not like other things. Specially. Our disad uniquely turns the case. Like, other things don't turn the case except for our disad, I guess is what you're saying. That doesn't make sense either. Like, I don't know what that means, and I don't know why you say that word. Or our interpretation uniquely solves their offer. What does that mean? Like, Other interpretations might not, but ours does because it's special. Like, is there another interpretation in the debate that we're talking about? If not, then why are we making comparisons between our arguments and these like mysterious arguments that might exist in other debates? I have no idea. Particularly, like, really, we're really sure about this. That's just the new version of certainly or whatever. Get rid of all of that. Again, this was just developed, the reason this started is because people needed a moment to think, or the probably one is because that's what you all say in your day-to-day lives, and then that's just infiltrated debate. But you've just used probably as like something you say in debates. Don't say it in debates anymore. Number 6, literally, or entirety. As in, the DA turns the entirety of the economy advantage. It's almost always delivered with that affect. Or, this takes out the entirety of the case. You usually deliver it in a way that's similar to that. Or, you add the word literal in there. Nuclear war literally turns the entirety of the case. Totally meaningless. And totally meaningless in a dangerous way, because it facilitates hyperbolic language, hyperbolic thoughts, and hyperbolic assessments of arguments. Literally has been described as the worst word in the English language in contexts outside of debate. And certainly, if any of those people that criticize literally, when people say, I'm literally starving. No, you're not. This is literally the worst thing in the world. No, it's not. They would certainly criticize the way we use it in debates. We use it in that same way. Nuclear war literally turns the case, as opposed to what? Like metaphorically or figuratively? Nuclear war figuratively turns the case because ... No idea. So don't use that word at all. And the word entirety is just sort of implied if you fully develop an argument. So if your argument is that this ad turns the entirety of the economy advantage, then just make an argument that like your internal link to the economy outweighs theirs, and therefore it accesses the economy better. And that's like an argument in a debate, which is where we are in this debate, in this round, at this tournament, at this Summer Institute, at this Georgetown debate seminar, in Washington, D.C., in the United States of America, on Earth, in this solar system, in this space-time continuum or whatever. Don't say all that. Just make your argument, and if your argument is that strong, then communicate the strength of your argument. Don't just assert it. Don't assert that you turn the entirety of the case or whatever. Number 7. This one used to be a little more popular than it is now. I don't know. Maybe it's just that I've gotten annoyed enough with this that people don't say this in front of me. On this question. So, for a long time, people would say, cross-sex was embarrassing on this question. And then they would just say something. They'd be like, the app doesn't solve soft power. Cross-sex was embarrassing on this question. Just sort of look disparagingly at their opponents. Cross-sex was almost never embarrassing on that question. And who asked a question? Right? Like it's on an argument, not a question. But this is then, that was like the initial introduction of this thing. And there it was just sort of mean and usually wrong, but at least it made some sense because in cross-sex sometimes there are questions, right? But it has evolved into just like all-purpose general use in speeches. Our evidence is surprisingly good on this question, Judge. Well, first of all, you've implied that like I should be surprised that your evidence is good, so that's bad. And second, that doesn't mean anything. Like, who asked a question? No one asked a question. We're talking about an argument, and all you've said there is, I think our card is good. FYI. Right? Our evidence is surprisingly good on this question means we have a good card, Judge. But none of you would stand up and be like, now in the link debate, our cards are good, Judge. Now in the impact debate, I believe our evidence is good. Again, in this debate. Right? You wouldn't say that, but that's all you're saying here, but you've kind of dressed it up in a way that makes it sound like you're being comparative or like cool, like kind of edgy. You're sort of, I don't know why you do this. But get rid of that entirely. Unless someone has asked a question and you're referring to a specific question, so on that question that you just asked, here's my response. Don't call everything in a debate questions. Impacts aren't questions. Arguments aren't questions. Links aren't questions. Interpretations aren't questions. They're arguments. Debate the arguments. Don't pretend that they're questions. And don't just say that you're surprised about how good your evidence is on a question. Number 8. Always going to win or never going to win. For example, we are always going to win, that the economy is strong now. Or, they're never going to win a link turn because we control uniqueness. Even if statements and like comparative ballot writing is the gold standard for good debating. So even if they win X, we still win Y, and if we win Y, we win the debate because, and then an explanation. That's smart, that's great, that's a good blueprint for a strong rebuttal, a rebuttal that convinces judges. But the introduction of this like hyperbolic always and never language makes your comparisons seem silly, and it basically just kind of becomes boasting, like wasteful boasting, and it reflects a very unrealistic assessment of the debate. If you think that anyone is always going to win something, like, what does that even mean? Like in the next debate, you will also win this argument? Like we're always going to win if the economy is strong now. That means in this debate, in the next debate, at the next tournament, and like when I'm in college 6 years from now, even then we're going to win if the economy is strong. That's dumb, right? Why are you bothering to say that? Or they're never going to win a link turn. Like not now, not tomorrow, not ever. We're drawing a line in the sand. It will never occur, ever. You with me, Judge? Yeah, no, not with you. Be more appreciative of the possibility that they'll win something and that they might be right. And get rid of all this language that facilitates the hyperbolic stuff. People who say always going to win also tend to say like game over, or sign your ballot now, or it's donezo, or whatever, like just garbage boasting. Don't boast in your speeches. Boasting is not a good thing. Number 9. And this one also requires the movie voice. In a world. Or at the point where, or at the point when. Those don't require the movie. So for example, the economy will never be able to survive in a world of nuclear war. Or, in a world where we win uniqueness, there's only a risk of a link. At the point where we win uniqueness, there's only a risk of a link. You're not adding anything with this filler language, but you're kind of doing the hyperbolic boasting thing again. So the economy will never be able to survive in a world of nuclear war. All you're really saying is that nuclear war will devastate the economy. So say that, and then say why. Or if you're making the argument that in a world where we win uniqueness, there's only a risk of a link, you just say what that means. So like, if it's a politics dissent, if NSA reform will pass without the plan, then the plan can only hurt its chances of passage, and then explain why, or explain your link or whatever. Don't dress it up in the weird movie stuff, like in a world. Is that like a different world? Is that like not this, like not Earth? It's like on Mars, you might be able to win uniqueness. On Mars, the economy might survive a nuclear war, but not on this world. Don't say that stuff. All right, Roman numeral 3. So that's a lot of stuff, and a lot of you are thinking like, whew, that's everything I do. How do you fix it? Drills to improve your efficiency. Subpoint 8, and the hardest one is transcription. This is the most tedious drill, but it's also the most effective drill. And it's the one that I encourage you to do several times if you identify efficiency as an issue. And I think for everyone, it's very important to do kind of occasional tune-ups and check-ins where you transcribe an entire speech that you have given and figure out all the garbage that you're saying. So here's the process. Step 1 is to obtain a recording. You need a video recording or an audio recording, audio is fine, of one of your speeches. And this is now super easy if you have a PC, because verbatim will let you do this just like even within verbatim, which is great. But otherwise you can do it on your phone. iPhone's very easy, just do a voice memo. Almost every computer has, every laptop has recording capabilities now. This used to be really hard. You used to have to like have a tape recorder or an actual video camera. You all have it easy. There's really no excuse. The best speeches to transcribe are 1 ARs, 2 NRs, and 2 ARs. So those are the ones that I would hone in on. But it's also helpful sometimes to do portions of other speeches. And a couple of examples would be like the 2AC on the case, or a 2NC on the case, or a 2NC on topicality, or something like that. You want to stay away from speeches that are largely cards, because transcribing cards is a waste of time. You can transcribe kind of original speeches, so like speeches from actual debates, or you can transcribe reworked speeches, speeches that you worked on and done again. But when you do this, you should try to choose speeches that are representative examples of your debate. If you've like really worked on your efficiency and then you use that to assess your efficiency, then it can be kind of artificial. Certainly start with a speech that is inefficient and then diagnose what's wrong and then work on your efficiency and then do it again and that kind of thing. Number 2 is I would just review the inefficiencies that I have described in this lecture. So what I basically did for you is I gave you, here's all the stuff to watch out for. Take a look at that. Remind yourself. Step 3 is to transcribe your speech, and this is the hard part. I suggest headphones. I suggest no distractions. You kind of got to be zoned in to do this. You open a text document or a Word document or whatever, and you open your video or audio recording. And you start from the beginning, you press play, and you transcribe everything that you say during the speech, including filler and repetition and like or whatever, noises. I have found in my experience that transcription takes approximately 5 minutes for every 1 minute of speech time once you get kind of good at it. And at the first time you do this, it might take more. But this is a slow process. You just like press play, start typing. And as soon as you fall behind, you press pause, back it up, press play again, stop, back it up, press play, and it takes a while. Okay, it's not easy, but nothing worthwhile is easy, so it's worth it. Number 4 is you edit your speech. So you got this. Now you got this like chunk of text that's your speech. You copy. So always copy. Don't just start editing it. Copy that into like a new header or something, so that you have the original to look at. But now you have this second version. And start going through it and start editing it to correct your inefficiencies. So all the stuff that I've talked about are the things that you want to try to do. So your goals in this editing process is to use active voice, so get rid of all the passive voice stuff. Keep your sentences as simple as possible. Get rid of all the weird, lengthy sentences. Eliminate all the jargon, all the extraneous stuff. Eliminate all the unnecessary transitions and the signposting garbage and the intros and all that stuff that we talked about. And use clear and concise labels. So start, work on getting those labels cleaned up. And just treat your speech as a text thing, as a textual artifact to work with. Just like it was a rough draft of an English paper or whatever. Do the same thing. Step 5 is use that edited speech to improve. So here are the ways that I think you can use what I just described, so steps 1 through 4, to then get better debate. I think it's valuable as an end in itself, but here are some kind of additional things you can do. You can collaborate with an instructor, a summer camp instructor, or a coach or teacher during the season, or even a teammate during the season. And what you want to do is you want to provide that person that you're working with the original and the edited version, and then see if they have suggestions for ways that you can improve your editing of your transcript, or things that you didn't notice, or things that could make it even better. It's helpful to have another set of eyes on your doc, on your speech. Second thing you can do is practice delivering your edited version. This is really helpful for students with clarity issues, as I described before, because you can really use this to identify what the problem is. Is it that the words you're speaking aren't clear, or is it that your thoughts are not clear? And have someone listen to you speak your edited version, and if they're like, oh, that was really clear, then you know that most of the problem is not with like the physical aspects of speaking, but with the structural aspects of speech writing. The way you write your speeches is the problem, not your physical like words coming out of your mouth delivery. That can be really awesome. You'll find that you sound amazing, way better than you sound in a regular debate when you're speaking your edited version. Number 3 is add content to your speech. This is the one that I like to do the most. I always include this kind of anecdote. There was an amazing, like really top-level successful debater that was in the Voice Spartan Lab the first year that it happened. So 5 years ago now. And we did this drill, and we do this often in lab, like on a projector, kind of in front of the lab. And we got a 1AR that he delivered down to 1 minute. We edited so much stuff out of it that we said exactly what this debater said in 1 minute. It's amazing. This was not a bad debater. This was a really good debater. This happens a lot. Your speech will like halve in size. If it's a 5-minute rebuttal, it'll become like a 2-minute, 30-second rebuttal, or a 3-minute rebuttal. So then the question is like, what do you do with all that time? A lot of you are just so used to being inefficient that you can't really give a 5-minute speech. You can only give a 2 or 3-minute speech. You just don't notice that because half of your speech is just inefficient stuff. So work on filling in the content, and a lot of times that'll require you to be like, I actually don't know what the warrant for this argument is. I actually don't know how to explain this argument or this piece of evidence, or I actually don't really know how to do this comparison. I've never had to before because I never had time. So add some content in there and fill up your speech so that it's 5 minutes of just like beauty and polished content. It's wonderful. I love looking at those speeches. They're so good. Number 6 is make a list of prominent, actually it's not number 6, it's number 4. I can't read Roman numerals. Number 4 is make a list of the most prominent corrections. So see what you edited out a lot. Was it as to why? Was it at the point where? Was it probably? And just keep track of that. And maybe keep that list somewhere where you're going to see it a lot, in your debate room or in your locker or on your mirror or whatever. Someplace you'll see it a lot, and just kind of remember, oh yeah, gotta keep working on keeping that out of my speeches. Number 5 is critique your content. So when you transform your content into a text, it makes it much easier to just like take it apart, see what's wrong with it, make arguments about it, work through it, and figure out where you're right, where you're wrong, and that kind of thing. And when you figure out things like, oh, I could word this differently. Oh, this argument's not very good. Actually, if they said this, what I said doesn't answer that. So I got to change what I'm going to say. All of that stuff. This is not just a speaking activity or a speaking drill. It's also a content drill. And it's one of the best content drills that I've ever done or ever taught. And then the last one, number 6, is flow yourself. And this is really good. So use your audio recording of your first speech and flow it. And just see if you can flow yourself. Or work with someone else, have someone sit next to you, a friend, and have them float you. And just kind of compare. Is that person writing down what you want them to write down? Or are you yourself writing down what you would want the judge to write down? And then record yourself doing the edited version and see the differences. What was easier to flow? What is still hard to flow? What can you do to your edited version to make it even more flowable, to make it even more easy for the judge to understand or follow? Best drill I do with anyone is this transcription thing. And I know it's hard, and I know a lot of you have short attention spans, and I know that Tetris or whatever calls, and that I get that. But if you really want to get better at debate, making this time investment to do these transcriptions is the best thing that you can do, because you'll really have to take seriously your entire speech and really investigate it, really critique it. It's wonderful. I love doing this drill. All right, subpoint B, the second drill: start and stop. The way this works is you do a speech rework with an instructor or a peer or a teammate or whatever, and they stop you every time you do one of these inefficient things that you're trying to eliminate. There's kind of 2 purposes of this. One is just to correct bad habits. A lot of times, this is just, like I said, bad habits. You're not doing this on purpose, you're just doing this instinctually without thinking about it. And this exercise can be brutal, because every time you mess up, stop, start over. The second purpose is just to maintain and make sure that these things aren't creeping back in. Because it's real easy for them to creep back in because you hear them so often. Even if you become a really efficient speaker, the people you debate are not very efficient. They're going to have bad habits, and sometimes you'll start to get those habits too. So how do you do this? Well, you prepare a speech. You prepare to rework a speech. Same speeches are useful as I identified before. Again, you just kind of review the inefficiencies. And then you identify 1 or 2 inefficiencies that you really want to work on. If you do too much, the person listening kind of can't follow. And then let the person that's listening know. So teammate or coach, I would like to get rid of which means that, and I would like to get rid of probably. That's the purpose of this. Then you deliver the speech, and that person stops you every time you say one of those things. And when that happens, you start over. When it gets really bad, you can even incorporate some physical stuff. So you can have them throw something at you, toss a soft, one of those stress balls at you or something like that. Or in the summer, we used to do this with water guns. I'm taking them outside. It's hard to do that with a computer, so it kind of has to be a speech off the flow. But just the element of ooh, that jarred me can help you break that habit. Don't be mean, but sometimes I've seen these are really tough. People they have to say these words for whatever reason. Every time you slip up, then restart and do it again. And if it's really bad, you can have some variations, because that could take forever, right? You might never be able to give a 5-minute speech without saying probably, if that's one of the words that you always say. So you can do mini speeches where you just do part of a speech, and your goal is just to get through that part of the speech. Maybe it's I just want to get through this the case in the 2AC without ever saying probably, or I want to get through the first minute of my 2AR without saying which means that. Or you can just restart not the whole speech, but a particular section of your speech. So you can say, I'm not going to start at the very beginning. Once I kind of treat it like a video game. Once you pass a certain level, you get to like restart at that level. That can be helpful. And then finally, you should repeat this drill for other inefficiencies. So this one isn't as good as the other one because you can only target a couple of things at a time, just because it's too hard to listen otherwise. But if you have a lot of inefficiencies, you might have to do this with different people or at different times, looking for different words or different inefficiencies. And so you just kind of have to do it again. I would encourage, if efficiency, if you were sent here because your instructor said, like, you're very inefficient, that's something you need to work on. Or if you've gotten that feedback from a lab leader or from your coach or even from a teammate, you kind of got to do the hard work with these drills, and you've got to spend the time making it right, because there's no quick fix. There's no like, you just have to think like left, right, ABBA right before your speech, and then you won't have any efficiencies. It's not like that. There's no cheat code. You have to kind of work on it, and you can make incremental progress. But the cool thing about this is that you don't have to be perfect for it to be substantially beneficial. If you are a very inefficient speaker, even if you make like a 20% improvement in your efficiency, that's 20% more speech time. Can you imagine what it would be like if your speeches had 20% more time? And if you're debating against an opponent that is inefficient and you get to be relatively efficient, you get more speech time than your opponent. Like, how awesome is that? A lot of you want to go faster than your opponents, and there is some marginal benefit to being faster than your opponents, but being more efficient than your opponents is like a sweet way to make your speech time that you get in the debate actually count for more, like have room for more arguments than your opponent's speech time. So that's the end of this. I will turn off the camera, and then I will let anyone